Sure.
You're welcome. Vice President Mike Pence announced Monday the U.S. plans to move its embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem by the end of next year. Pence addressed Israel's parliament, saying the U.S. is shortening its timeline for moving the embassy. The United States' recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital in December sparked protests in the region. Seth Doan has more on Vice President Pence's trip.
Israel gave Vice President Mike Pence the sort of welcome usually reserved for a president.
Members of the Knesset.
But during his speech to the Knesset, Israel's legislature, Arab lawmakers made it clear how they felt. They heckled Pence and held up signs saying Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine before being escorted out. Recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital has infuriated the Palestinians. But Pence only repeated his message today.
Jerusalem is Israel's capital. And as such, President Trump has directed the State Department to immediately begin preparations to move the United States Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
This former hotel is believed to be the site where the new U.S. Embassy will be built. But Arab leaders warn moving the U.S. Embassy here to Jerusalem will destabilize the region and thwart the chance to find peace.
Palestinians have protested what they see as a U.S. bias toward Israel and say America can no longer broker peace. We found mounting frustration today at this UN medical clinic in the West Bank town of Ramallah, where the U.S. just cut funds for refugee services. Mr. Pence is not welcome, this patient told us. He is not welcome here at all after President Trump's declaration.
That clinic is hit by the $65 million cutback in U.S. funding. The director of the UN agency that supports Palestinian refugees here told us today that they will try to make up for that shortfall so they won't have to cut services. Elaine?
Seth Doan, thank you. CBS News State Department reporter Kylie Atwood joins me now from Washington. So, Kylie, Vice President Pence said Monday that the U.S. is committed to achieving lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians, but the decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital has created significant tension. Is the administration more concerned with making Israel happy than it is with creating peace in the region?
Well, what you just explained would clearly be the perspective that the Palestinians feel right now. They think that the U.S. has basically adopted Netanyahu's playbook. I spoke with one Palestinian government official today who said that we need to move away from this focus on, satisfying Israel's needs and focus on the peace process. But the U.S. thinks that in declaring that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, they've cleared one of the hurdles that was on the table. And they think that they can move forward with this peace process. But, President Abbas has now declared that the U.S. is no longer trusted as a mediator in this process. And he actually wasn't even in the region while Vice President Pence visited. He was instead meeting with European leaders to try and discuss how they can be involved in a multilateral effort to drive forward this peace process that the U.S. has traditionally been the leader of.
Well, we saw in Seth Doan's piece that the vice president was interrupted by protesters shortly after he began speaking. What more can you tell us about that and who is responsible?
So there are about 120 members of Israeli parliament, and those protesters that we saw were from one party that is made up of Arab members of parliament. And they were the ones who, right at the beginning of the vice president's speech, started protesting. They had signs, and as we heard in the piece earlier, those signs said that Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine, not Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, as Pence said. And they stood up and they created, a fit in front of everyone. But I want to point out, I spoke to some Israeli government officials today, and they said, listen, this is pretty typical for Israeli parliament. People are allowed to protest. They're not allowed to have signs like that, and that's why they were taken out when it becomes too disruptive. But it's usually a pretty colorful place, and so this wasn't totally out of the norm.
Important context. All right. Well, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has not yet signed off on safety plans to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Do we know what factored into the decision to make the change sooner than the administration had planned, and whether Tillerson will approve the plan?
So you're right. Now, basically, this decision to move the U.S. Embassy has been officially sped up, at least in terms of vocalizing that plan. But it hasn't been inked because Tillerson is the one who has to sign off of making the plan official. He hasn't done that yet. We also know that Tillerson was one of the opponents of this decision to move the embassy at all. But that said, we know that there are certain players at the White House, like Jason Greenblatt, like Trump's son, Jared Kushner, who have been leading the efforts on this process. And they're the ones who are in Trump's ear. So it does look like Tillerson will eventually sign off on this plan to move the embassy next year in 2019. But I want to point out that there are clearly domestic political objectives here for the White House, because it will help Republicans in the 2018 midterms if they can say that Trump was able to follow through on a campaign promise, which was indeed to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
All right, Kylie Atwood for us in Washington. Kylie, thanks very much.